Ayika. Once upon a time, they say they were living in Isuwala. Coyote's den was there. Over at Monkpavi stood Porcupine's house. The two were the best of friends, and they visited each other regularly. Coyote would call on Porcupine, and a few days later, Porcupine in turn would go over to Coyote's den. This visiting was always going on, back and forth. Whenever the two would meet, they would talk of all sorts of things. Once in a while, they would talk about girls, and other times they would talk about the harvests from their fields. This is what the two kept doing. It so happened that for a good length of time, one did not show at the other's place. So Coyote thought, maybe I will go visit my friend tonight. I won't eat anything now, but I will run to his house. He always gives me something to eat. For that reason, Coyote did not fix himself supper. He skipped his evening meal. Coyote headed for Monkpavi at dusk. Upon arriving, he called into Porcupine's house. I am here. How about inviting me in? Sure enough, his friend Porcupine asked him to enter. Come in, whoever you are. Come in, whoever is out there, he shouted from inside. So Coyote stepped in. Obviously, Porcupine was in the middle of preparing a meal. A delicious smell permeated his house. No doubt it was the fragrance of a roast that Coyote noticed. And because it is Coyote's nature, he was already looking forward towards the food. Eagerly, he kept sticking his tongue out and licking his snout. His tongue moved in and out, and saliva dripped from both sides of his mouth. When his friend saw him like that, he said, have a seat. We will be eating in a little while, for sure. We will have a feast. You came at a good time. Persistently, Porcupine flipped over the food he was preparing. Oh, how it sizzled. Something spurted out into the fireplace, for the fire leapt in long leaps of flames. No doubt he had a fat roast cooking. Soon he was finished. He had also made piki to go with it. He finally spread out the food and said, all right now, come over here. We will have a good meal. I am glad you dropped by again. So the two settled down to the food, and they ate. How delicious the meat was they ate, and the piki they ate with it. Not a trace did they leave. Then they were through. They moved over and reclined against the stone bench in Porcupine's house. Then they fell into chatting, finally quiet, a bit into the night. Coyote said, well, I suppose it is late. I'll be moving along. I enjoyed the food a great deal, but I cannot help but ask you this question. What kind of meat was it that we ate? Where did you get it? Well, yes, Porcupine replied. I was still planning to tell you. Yes, of course. I just thought that if you came to my house one day, I would like to know where to get that kind of meat, Coyote said. It is really nothing special, Porcupine continued. Up on top the mountain top, there are many greasewood trees. There, I peeled off bark from one of the trees. I removed as much bark as I wanted, and took it to my home. When I arrived, I set them down right here, and then I poked one of my quills into each of my nostrils. And then, when the blood began to flow, I smeared it carefully all over the greasewood bark. Then I baked it so. You see, it is nothing really fancy. But it was really savory, Coyote replied. Be sure to call on me soon, by the way. Could you spare one of your quills, my friend? Coyote asked. Whereupon Porcupine let him have one. Thus, having extended his invitation, Coyote went to his home. He spent the night there. And then, the next morning, without delay, he headed up to the mountaintop. True enough, greasewood trees were growing there. He started to select a good specimen. He peeled off the really thick bark and hauled it to his den, and then he got out Porcupine's quill. Again and again he attempted to poke up into his nose. He tried several times, but each time he hesitated to go through with it. Finally, he said, I should really feed my friend too. And with this thought, he rammed the quill up into his nostril. Blood poured forth. Persistently, he drove it up the other nostril. Now that both of his nostrils were punctured, blood really began to flow. Next, he dripped his blood all over the greasewood bark, making sure that he covered each splinter enough. Overall, he turned the bark over and also covered the other side. Coyote was so busy doing that, he began to feel strange. He felt quite weak. He had to sit down. Sitting by the bark, he died, after all his blood had drained out. Coyote intended to roast some meat for his friend, but instead he bled to death, thereby the bark. When evening came around, Porcupine said, "Let me go and look in on my friend. He is always so gullible. Who knows how he made out?" With that, he embarked over to Coyote's place. When he arrived, he shouted down into the house, "It is me. How about some words of welcome?" But there was no answer. "I knew it," Porcupine uttered. As he let himself into Coyote's den, he stepped in and found his friend slumped over by the greasewood bark, blood still oozing out of his nose, but at a steady, dissipating rate. Porcupine blasted Coyote. "Why did you have to believe everything? What I told you had to be a lie." That is all he said to his friend. Then he returned home. Thus Porcupine had caused the death of his own friend, but he probably made friends with somebody else somewhere. And here the story ends.